Go ahead and start.
Yeah, ¿están listos?
Okay. It's 7:15, so let's go ahead and start. Nice to see so many of you here this evening. Thank you for attending our Ask an Atheist forum, sponsored by the Antelope Valley Freethinkers, a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting a rational worldview through fellowship, education, and community service. My name is Alice Sweet. I am the Secretary of the Antelope Valley Freethinkers, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I'd also like to thank our host for the evening, the Centre for Spiritual Living, for providing this beautiful sanctuary for this event. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this isn't a debate with winners or losers. Rather, it's an opportunity to promote understanding and acceptance of non-believers through civil discourse. It's not our goal to convert anybody this evening or to change your mind about God, but we do hope to change your mind and your perceptions about atheists. At this time, I should probably point out that this event is being recorded. The camera is positioned solely on the panel, with very little of the audience, but I did want to make you aware that you may be on film. Okay, so that our panelists have an idea of the composition of the audience tonight, could you please raise your hand if you have a positive disposition towards atheists and non-believers? Lovely. And please raise your hand if you have a negative disposition.
Towards atheists.
and another here or there. Anyone? Okay. So let me introduce our panelists. First we have Dave Dion. He's the president of the Antelope Valley Freethinkers since 2009. He's a native of Southern California, where he attended Catholic elementary and high school. He was accepted to, but didn't attend, Our Lady of Queens of Angels Seminary. He was awarded a Bachelor of Arts in English and Teaching credential from California State University, Northridge, and has been an elementary school teacher for 19 years. Next we have Jay Naffis. He's an aerospace engineer and software systems safety specialist. His international technical papers and presentations have focused on the role of the human factors in the design of complex, software-driven rocket systems. Those investigations of the failure modes of minds and of social systems have recently set him to writing online, and ideally soon in print, about the ways we can improve our understanding of ethics, morality, and the values that reliably result in good ideas. Who's next? Okay, next we have David Farmer. He was born in Hollywood, California, and he grew up in the Antelope Valley, where he graduated from Palmdale High School in 1979. He went on to study further and has credentials in teaching in science, health, history, and he's been working as a teacher for the last 21 years. He's a passionate cinephile, meaning, it sounds bad, meaning he's a real movie buff, and he also enjoys model making and home renovation. Richard Wade is a retired marriage and family therapist. For the last several years, he's written an advice column on a blog called Friendly Atheist. He responds to hundreds of letters and advises people who have been mistreated by their family and friends because of their lack of religious belief. He tries to dispel the family's fear and loathing and to restore love and respect on both sides of conflict. He has spoken as a guest atheist at several churches, where he debunks the widespread myths and misconceptions about atheists. He hopes to prevent the needless strife and conflict that religious families go through when they discover that one of their members is an atheist. And lastly, we have Gabriel Sturdivant. He's a college student pursuing an advanced degree in computer science. He currently holds degrees in software development and mathematics. He graduated from Village Christian High School in 2005, where he was involved with student spiritual leadership. Gabriel has considered himself to be an atheist for 5 years. He enjoys reading about and researching philosophy and sciences such as physics. He's a dog lover who fights against breed-specific legislation and stereotypes. So I'm going to start the evening by asking each of our members on the panel this question. How did you become an atheist? David.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. I was born into a devout Catholic family. As a child, I went through all the sacraments. I was baptized, of course, First Communion, First Confession, Confirmation. I attended Catholic school throughout elementary and high school. And you might have heard in my bio that I actually applied to and was accepted to Our Lady Queen of Angels Seminary on the grounds of San Fernando Mission, which is now defunct. Not that I'm drawing any causal connection between my application and the demise of the seminary. By the time I was a junior or senior, I was already beginning to have some doubts. The more I was exposed to science and philosophy and other religions, the more doubts crept into my certainty. I remember at one point during a Mass, in the Catholic Mass, there's a section called the Profession of Faith, where you essentially itemize and list all the things you believe in, such as, we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and it goes on from there. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not so sure about that part, and that right there just does not make any sense to me. And it sort of slowly dawned on me that I really didn't believe what was going on, or what I was saying I believed in. The word atheist wasn't really talked about in my household. If it was probably in a negative way. So it really wasn't until I got to college that I was actually able to pursue what it was I was believing in or doubting. And essentially, that's when I became an atheist. I decided at that point that the supernatural, the divine, didn't make any sense to me anymore. And that's when I started calling myself an atheist.
Well, thank you all again for coming. I suppose it was a single sentence in a book called Black Elk Speaks by Lakota Sioux Elder, who had lived through the destruction of his tribe. And I hadn't really thought seriously that much of anything before that. I had gone to Sunday schools, I have a vague recollection at least. Apparently that was fun, somewhat. My parents were quite liberal Christian and kind of, I'm not entirely sure they're Christian, they watch a little bit too much Bill Maher for that to be the case. But anyway, so the one line was, and they put us in square houses and made us be like the whites. And I'd always considered, well, a square house makes sense. It's an engineering optimization. You can fit the most stuff in that volume. It was at that point that I realized there were other values out there. And after dabbling for a few years in various pagan traditions and kind of native spirituality, I conducted a test to cast a spell for a friend of mine who was trying to get through heroin rehab at the time. And she failed out, and that confirmed it. There's nothing out there. And from that point on, there was no going back.
Hello everybody.
again, like everyone else, thanks for coming. I was raised also in a Catholic family. I did most of the sacraments anyway, baptized and confirmation. Went to Catholic school for 3 years. My father was not particularly religious. My mother was and still is. As I went through school, I became more and more enamored with science. And many of my friends, a few of my friends anyway, they had not been raised with any kind of religion. They were atheists, and they would make fun of me, and I became more and more of an apologist. The more they pushed, the more I pushed back. But the science began to unravel the things that I was pushing back with. The thing that ultimately began to turn me was the Noah story. It was impossible. I looked at every conceivable way that this could happen, and there wasn't any. There just wasn't. It was utter nonsense, all of it. And I tried to make excuses for it, but there weren't any, and it wasn't for lack of trying to do it. So then I began to question it more and more. If this is wrong, how much else of this book is wrong? And I came to the conclusion I could not trust this. It was difficult to call myself an atheist. I did it for a long time. I switched over to pantheism. I tried to find some middle ground to this, but everything ultimately becomes softened and weakened, and it vanishes really into reason. It disappears. It's not an easy task to go from Christianity to atheism. And Christianity had built into it all kinds of punishment. And it turns out, if you were raised in a Christian home, you never really fully escape that. It never leaves your mind. It's always there someplace. It's been drilled into you. It's a brainwashing when you're little, and you can't shake it. So, as rational as I can be, I made it a point not to raise my son with any kind of religion, so he would not go through this. And as it turns out, if you don't raise a kid with religion, atheism is the default position.
Both my parents worked at the County Museum of Natural History, and they were designers and illustrators, but all their friends were scientists. And so as a kid, I was exposed to science constantly. I spent all my free time at the museum. I knew every object in every case in every gallery, and I loved it. And I would go out to lunch when my dad would go out with his friends, and they'd be talking about their projects and their papers, and I was fascinated. I was especially fascinated with how tough scientists have to be. They would be sweating bullets because they just submitted a paper, and all of their colleagues were going to peer review it, and that means they're going to try their best to shoot holes in it. And he's worked on it for 2, 3, 4 years, and he's afraid maybe there's something he missed. But I was impressed with how brave they had to be to put themselves into that process. And so when I was in like the 3rd grade and kids were saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And one kid said, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman, something like that. I'd say, I want to be an anthropologist, or I want to be a paleontologist, or whatever ology it was that month that had impressed me. So and all the kids would go, what's an entomologist? A bug scientist. So it's kind of geeky, but both my parents were not really religious. My mom had been raised as a Baptist, and she had rejected most of that as a teen. And my dad had been raised as a Presbyterian, and he had lost interest in that sometime when he was a young man. So Dad called himself an agnostic, but I think back then it was really, he was using it as a euphemism. You know, it's not as ugly as the A word, atheist. But I really don't think he believed it at all. And I'd say my mom was, I'd call her a deist. She sort of assumed there was something out there, but certainly not a personal God. So I was raised in that atmosphere, encouraged to think for myself and to think critically and to really look at things and look for evidence for things instead of just accepting people's stories. And I think I was sort of born skeptical. There's a joke in my family that my first words weren't mama or dada, it was yeah, right. And I've got lots of wrinkles up here, put the eyebrows go up, and that's skepticism. So that's just naturally built into me. So I never really was, my mom took us to church twice, and it was clear this wasn't going to work. So she sort of did that because she thought that's what you're supposed to do. But the most religious I ever got was, for about 10 years, I was practicing Zen Buddhist at the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And that was interesting, but after a while, it got old also, and I just grew out of it. So I went along with it, really not thinking about it one way or the other until 9/11. And watching those two towers come down were like the two last nails in the coffin of my interest in religion at all. Because I could see this is the inevitable consequence of building a system where millions of people believe in unsubstantiated things. If you have this authority you can call upon that cannot be questioned, you can tell people to do anything. And I realized I want nothing more to do with this. But I didn't start calling myself an atheist until about 8 years ago when I started reading atheist blogs, and I realized I had been an atheist for a very long time before I ever started calling myself that. So.
My story starts when I was a little bit younger. My mother committed suicide when I was 8 years old, which led to a series of events that forced me to live with my aunt and uncle, who were very devout Protestant Christians. They sent us to, myself, my sister, and their two kids, they sent them to Village Christian High School, where we were indoctrinated to believe that if you ever questioned your faith, that meant that you didn't have enough. So it was, built into me at that point to never question, to just resort back to, I need to believe more. And so every time I would question, I would just automatically shut that off. And once I got out into the real world and away from the Christian bubble that had been set up for me, I started dealing with the question of the nature of God, whether or not God could have a final plan for your life, and whether or not you as a human could have free will to change that plan. And it dawned on me that if everything that I'd ever believed in was true, then there would be nothing that I could possibly do to change the outcome that God had planned for my life. And so I kind of gave up. I gave up on everything in my life. And I'm not sure exactly what caused me to stop thinking that way, but the moment that I decided that I could make a difference in my own life was also the same moment that I stopped really believing. I think if I were to actually nail it down in one moment, it would be that. But from that point on, I started playing devil's advocate with every believing friend that I had, trying to make my faith work in this new worldview that I was forming. And eventually, I just realized that I wasn't playing devil's advocate anymore. I just didn't believe. And so that was the moment when I just said, oh, okay, I don't believe this anymore, which is when, like Richard here, I started calling myself an agnostic until I started reading up more on what the word meant and what the belief system entailed. And about 5 years ago, I finally just accepted I'm an atheist. I just simply don't believe anymore.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of questions this evening. We've had them submitted via our Facebook page. I hope I've collected them all. Could you check if there are any more in there? No? Okay. And we've also got our number here that you can text questions. So if during the event you hear something that prompts a question, feel free to text that question to me real time. I'll get it and I can pass it on to the panel. Okay, we've got some great questions. First one, and I'm just going to put the question out there, and maybe each one of the panelists will have something to say, maybe just one or two of them. Okay, first one. Life has no purpose other than that which we choose to give it. Atheism gives us the freedom to choose our purpose. Okay, I'm not seeing a question in that. It's a statement. Okay, well, do I need to ask if you guys would all agree with that?
I agree.
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
It's carried.
Motion carries.
Okay, here's one. Why do so many atheists put up Christmas decorations?
I'll field that one.
Okay, then.
My wife makes me.
She sounds awesome.
I grew up with Christmas decorations. I love Christmas. It's fun. I like the camaraderie of people. I like the Christmas carols. I enjoy the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. So I put up lights and then I take them down. For me, it doesn't hold any religious meaning, but there is a connection with other people. If you want to call it spirituality, I don't use that word, but the connection with other people, I like that.
Yeah, my wife makes me, and she's wonderful, so I do it and try not to complain and pretend that I'm not Scrooge. But I love it because the pagan roots of it are about people getting together in the dead of winter, because it's just around winter solstice and it's cold, and people would get together to share food and share warmth and stay alive, and I love that part of it. But I love the positivism that comes from that, so I accept all the supernatural part that just sort of it's less and less each year, but I still really enjoy it. Yeah.
Slightly different variation of the foregoing. I kind of like the subversive aspect of it, because you're literally looking at evidence of the plagiarism inherent in Christianity. And yes, the camaraderie is fun. Yes, there's a huge positive feeling associated with it, kind of huddling around like penguins at the South Pole. But at the same time, you get to, I think it was Hitchens who said one of his principal pleasures was to crow over the misfortunes of others, and so that's perhaps a subversive thing in the back of my mind.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. So what's the point of living? What's the point of even living if you won't acknowledge God? What is the point of even living if you won't acknowledge God? Who wants to take that one?
There is a lot to life that is purely natural, doesn't involve any supernatural aspects at all, that are fulfilling and loving and things that contribute to your well-being, the love of family and friends, your career can be very fulfilling, education. I deal with children, and that's very fulfilling to see them learning and growing and maturing. Just learning about this universe, what little we know about it, and how much more there is still to discover, is awe-inspiring and motivating. And we have this wonderful methodology for weeding out bad ideas and delusions called science, the scientific method. It's an attempt to be objective and systematic and ensure that we're not fooling ourselves. And it's taken us to a point that was unimaginable even a few years ago. We're learning more and more almost every day, and that rate is increasing. So there's a lot to life that it doesn't involve the supernatural or the divine at all. That's enough for me personally Maybe for some people it isn't, but for me, this world is more than enough.
Yeah, but could second everything David said, and note also that there's a kind of fatalism or nihilism inherent in that kind of question, where it's, if you're not assigned a purpose externally, you can't generate one yourself, is the notion, or you must inherently be purposeless. That's not even not true, it's not possible, because if you think that fatalism works and that you should just withdraw from everything because God's not real or something bad has happened, then just try to stay in bed for more than 15 hours. It gets really difficult. Not doing something takes energy. It's an intentional choice. So fatalism is itself self-defeating. It's a decision with consequences, just like any other action is. So even by trying to withdraw from purpose, you're choosing a purpose. So the question can't make sense. Not only doesn't, but can't.
I reject the idea of purpose. I don't see myself as having a purpose. I wasn't born with purpose. I was just born. I wake up alive every day. It's not a choice. It's what happens. So it's really, what am I going to do with the life that I have? And the life that I have, I want to be happy in the life that I have. And I don't mind making other people happy, and I don't mind going out into the community and doing things, and it gives me a good feeling when I make life a little easier for other people, and I can contribute with what I do in teaching. I don't think of that as purpose. I think of that as living. And I don't have an end, it's not an end game for me. So I will live until I die, and I will try to have a good life in the interim. I just saw a cartoon recently, and I just loved it. It was Charlie Brown sitting next to Snoopy. I'm sure Schultz didn't write it because he never wrote anything funny, but this was... But Charlie Brown says to Snoopy, one day we will be dead. And Snoopy says that in all of the others we will not.
He said, one day we will be dead. And Snoopy said, but in all the others, we will not.
If you want a purpose, pick one. It's your responsibility. If you want a point to your life, pick one. Invent one. Or choose one of the very many popular ones that other people have invented. It's there, but it is your responsibility for you to wait for one to be beamed into you or born into you from an outside entity. That's an illusion. I remember precisely when I decided what I wanted to do with my life. I was 12 years old. It was about the time when you start wondering about such things. And I had been exposed to just enough suffering, so I was aware of the fact that there's suffering everywhere. But it hadn't been so much that it crushed me. And so I was aware of that, and I realized I wanted to do something about that. I didn't just want to leave it alone and just watch it passively. So all I knew was I wanted to do something in my life so that people I could influence would be more likely to stop hurting themselves and others, and more likely to start helping themselves and others. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to be. I had sort of grand ideas about being famous and doing something with huge crowds, but that's a 12-year-old's fantasy. I ended up doing that on a much smaller scale as a counselor. This is what I do. I try to get whatever I can to get people to stop hurting themselves and others and start helping themselves to others. And I have been successful in a very small scale. But perhaps at 1-to-1 is really the scale that counts. And I find great joy in that, and I find great joy in just the experience of living, the experience of life. And when the last of my beliefs about supernatural things fell away, that just became all the more so. It became all the more passionate for me, all the more vivid for me. And so the idea of needing this thing instilled into me from outside is absurd. It's right. The question cannot really make sense.
I think that I agree most wholly with Jay. I think that the question is absolutely absurd. It's a belief that we have a meaning instilled in our life at birth. Life is what you make of it, you know, and for me, once again, similar to Richard, I've seen enough suffering in my life and experienced enough suffering that my purpose in life has been to try and end that suffering. And most recently, over the last few years, especially once I met my girlfriend, that focus has been aimed towards animals a lot, because they're the most innocent of the creatures on this earth, you know, the ones that are least capable of helping themselves. So for me personally, my life has had the purpose that I give it, and I try to make that a good purpose every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Roseanne. Okay. You call yourself Antelope Valley Freethinkers. What is free thinking? I see the president of the Antelope Valley Freethinkers is going to take this one.
Free thinking is a methodology. It's a way to evaluate religious claims by rejecting authority or dogma or tradition or faith, and embracing instead reason and logic and evidence. And it doesn't have to be confined to just religious ideas. It can be applied to any number of ideas or ideologies, government systems, economics, any kind, just about anything you can imagine, you can evaluate with this free thinking methodology. So it's essentially free inquiry. You're free to think and pursue ideas and questions that you might not otherwise be encouraged to do.
I'll just add to this a little bit. I think it's important to note that free thinkers are not, this is not a dogma. This is not a faith. This is, everyone up here has a different approach. We don't have a missalette to pick up and sing a hymn from. We all have the basic same conclusion. We see no evidence of a deity of any kind. But in many other ways, we have some differences. For example, I think of myself as an agnostic atheist, and that I would say, I don't know if there is a God. I see no evidence for the existence of one. Whereas others may straight up say, no, I'm an atheist, and I see your position as weak, or whatever it is. So we don't agree necessarily, we're not lockstep on this. We don't have the discipline of the Republican Party, but...
To build on that point, there are only two things, I think, that an atheist has to value, or that a person has to value in order to converge on something like an atheistic position. They must value evidence, and they must value logical consistency. Those two things, given the state of knowledge and this everywhere to be had for anyone with an electronic device, results inevitably in the conclusion that the supernatural is just the natural we haven't discovered yet. That ghost hunters really are just abusing their instruments. As I think it was a rapper named Grip said. That as long as we share those two values, and from there, all other discussion is possible. If someone renounces the value of evidence, you can't provide any evidence to change their opinion. If someone doesn't value logical consistency, you cannot argue them out of that position. With those two things, with those two values, you can break down any authority. Any authoritarian position becomes absolutely untenable, because as soon as the authority diverges from the evidence or asserts a counterfactual, anyone who values those things can rise up against them. And it's worth noting also that there's this idea that science can't be used to justify science. Well, just try it. Try to find evidence that says that you shouldn't value evidence. Lots of luck. I haven't been able to do it yet. I've been trying to take issue with Sam Harris on these points in previous debates he's put forward, where he's put forward these same concepts. And I can't do it. And it's not for lack of trying or for lack of motivation, because if I could, that would be a big breakthrough. But to move back to a couple of speakers ago, that's the scientific method in action. It's trying to take out the authority. If you can, all the power to you. If you can't, then you've just built their case all the stronger.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to join two questions together, one that was on a card and one that I received via text. What is the most prevalent or offensive misconception about atheists, and what have you personally experienced with bias or ill treatment because of your views?
The most common misconception that I find that I have actually thrown at me and my friends is that atheists are amoral nihilists, that we don't care about life, death, or anything in between, and that we're just selfish, self-centered people who live life in vain for their own selfish indulgence. And I've never actually met someone that debased, and I've known hundreds and hundreds of atheists, and I've gotten to know them very closely. And most of them are people I deeply respect and admire. They're people who really should be seen as exemplary. They're compassionate, and they're honest, and they're fair-minded, and they're respectful. And they will challenge supernatural claims, and they will challenge any claim that doesn't get backed up by evidence. And I admire that takes courage, because you are not rewarded for doing that. No, you are punished. And so I've had people threaten me, and I've had people insult me and my friends. And it gets old after a while, but it also, you get used to it, and you get to be sort of patient about it. And so I don't return that same hostility back, because that just is going to bounce back and forth. No, I try to carefully and patiently and respectfully point out to them that these things that you think are true about atheists are something that's not an original idea of yours. You heard that somewhere, and you automatically believed it, and you repeated it. And if you're repeating something that's false about a whole category of people, and it's a harmful thing, you are harming good, decent people who mean you no harm at all. And so, by not taking responsibility to double check to see if what you're about to repeat is true, you are ethically just as culpable for the harm you're causing as the person who made up the lie in the first place. It doesn't matter if you truly believe what you're saying about atheists. It doesn't matter, because you have taken no responsibility to double check. And so, ethically, you're still just as guilty of a transgression as the person who deliberately and knowingly made up a lie.
For me personally, I haven't really dealt with many negative reactions to me. I think mostly that's just because I'm very large and intimidating looking. But the one event in my life that really stands out to me just happened a few years ago when I was working at Antelope Valley College for the computer lab. I had a regular student who would come in every day. She was older, and she and I were always very pleasant with one another, had very short conversations, but one day she boldly came up to me and started asking what church I went to. And apparently, because I asked her why she assumption. She said, oh, well, you're always so nice, you're very helping, you always do your job very well. And I said, oh, well, I'm an atheist. And she went from looking, she was very happy, to be talking to me. She just suddenly blanked, and she almost turned white from how much it looked like she just was afraid of me at this point. And so it was just that one word. Made me go from being an upstanding, upright person to being somebody that was vile and disgusting to her. And that's the kind of reaction that stands out to me most. It's just, why would one word change the character and the moral fiber of a person, or at least the perception thereof?
Well, I've had a few incidents, actually. One is for this meeting today. I put up flyers in my teacher's lounge. There are other flyers there for ministries and this and that. So I put this, Ask an Atheist. And they're promptly torn down, and that's common. It happens all the time. I've had everybody, my students ask me things all the time, and Mr. Farmer, you believe in ghosts? I said, no, I don't believe in the supernatural. What about God? I don't believe in that either. That goes home, all the parents will pull kids out of class because they don't want them exposed to me. Maybe I'll suggest they think about things. I don't know what the issue is, but they're very worried about it. I jokingly said the kids could call me Mr. Farmer or Lord Farmer. I then had to apologize to a parent who told me there was no Lord but Jesus, and a principal who forced me to do it. So it's, you come across it. It's not unusual.
I suppose I'm fortunate, having been raised largely in the Northeast and California, and under 40, so I've never experienced any kind of denigration or even real disputation for coming out as an atheist to peers. Things get a bit different statistically, dealing with older generations. I've had perhaps the weirdest interaction I've ever had was with a person who was absolutely convinced that atheists believe in something. You're hiding your belief in God, or you're angry at him for something. And she wouldn't let it go. I thought that the strangest opinion, as though she was more certain of my beliefs than I was. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I suppose she must have been thinking, well, this is innate in me. I'd argue that it isn't. So it must be innate in you. It was a fumbling and terribly misinformed attempt at empathy on her part. To try to kind of diffuse the situation, I came back with the Tim Minchin response of, well, sure, I believe in stuff. I believe in rocks, and gravity, and that took some of the tension out of the room. But it bugged me, obviously, for quite some time afterwards that you would say such a bizarre and actually rather pretentious thing to another person for no good reason. She's not going to convince me of this. That, I guess, is how the cookie crumbles, and how, rather more seriously, how religion poisons the very structure of morality, on which, of course, rests its foundation on empathy. If it can make a person say something rather divisive and hurtful out of genuine empathy for another person, then it can do tremendous evil when it's raised above a scale of two people.
There are a couple ideas about atheists that I think are very problematic and common. The first is that atheists are certain that there is no God. And really, atheism is not a claim about 100% certainty. What it is a rejection of the claims of theism. It's disbelief in just that one thing, theism. The other is, I can't think of it more now, actually. So, well, let me move on to the second part of the question, which was any kind of negativity I've experienced because of my beliefs. And back in 2009, when I first became president, one of the things that motivated me to get more involved were things like Keith and Sons Ford in Mojave had a radio ad out at that time that literally told atheists to sit down and shut up. And that really got my attention. When the Lancaster City Council was mulling over the idea of their prayer policy before their meetings and posting "In God We Trust" prominently in the chamber on the chamber walls, one of the council people at that point said if she had her way, she'd have Bible verses all over the walls. I think we've probably all experienced those moments when we meet someone for the first time, or we disclose to someone for the first time that we're atheists, and just watching their smiles fade and their faces drop, and the tenseness of the conversation after that point is really unfortunate, because it shouldn't have to be that way. Hopefully by events like these, and going out and getting to know people from all kinds of backgrounds and beliefs, we can avoid things like that in the future and really start to understand and accept each other a lot better than we are.
Thank you. Okay, next question, and I don't want to hear any complaints that I'm asking hard questions. How many of the 10 commandments do you break every week? And if atheists don't believe in or fear God, what possibly prevents them from being immoral, unethical, or satanic? Do I need to repeat that?
Absolutely nothing. I'm very satanic. Would you read it to me one more time? The first part was intriguing.
How many of the 10 commandments do you break every week?
Copy most of them.
And if atheists don't believe in or fear God, what possibly prevents them from being immoral, unethical, or satanic?
I find it appalling that that religious systems base their morality in fear. I don't think a person is good or should be good because they're worried about getting a whooping from you know, the man in the sky kind of a thing. That's not a reason to be a good person. I'm not a person who believes in strict distinctions between good and evil. I think there are the things that work in a community. There was, I heard somewhere, I thought a brilliant quote, as long as people object to being murdered, there will be laws against murder. And it's really pretty straightforward. The basic idea that do unto others as you would have them do unto you is not a Christian thing. It's universal. You won't find a faith that doesn't have something like that built into it. And that's because it's required for existing as a social species. And there are variations on it. So what one person's morality is not necessarily another person's. So we tend to group together, and it tends to move around by country, by other belief systems, etc. I don't know if I answered the question for whoever asked that one, but yeah, I'm going to pass this on now and stop talking.
Let's see. I don't know how many of the commandments I've broken. I know I have gods other than the one. Yeah.
Is it murder?
It's ironically, I've murdered every single person I want to murder, and that number is 0. If your number is a positive integer, by the way, check with a local health provider. Ah, this will help. Have no other gods before me. Check. Got that one taken care of. You shall not make idols. I haven't made any idols this week. I haven't made one yet. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. I don't have a God, so it has no name. So I haven't broken that one. I don't have a God. Can't break it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I remember that there is a Sunday, so I guess I actually adhere to that one. I don't keep it holy, though I do whatever I please on it. Honor your father and mother. I do that. You shall not murder. I haven't murdered yet. I haven't really felt the urge. There's time left. We'll see. You shall not commit adultery. No, I haven't done that. You shall not steal. This pen's mine, so I'm set. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Yeah, I haven't done that. I haven't yet met my neighbor, so that helps. And you shall not covet. Well, number 10 and number 1, I guess. I break regularly, but other than that, it seems I'm pretty much a good Christian. Funny thing, that.
Yeah, the Ten Commandments part, I think you covered that beautifully. I break the Sabbath every week, because it's not my Sabbath, it's somebody else's. But so I don't, because it's not mine. But to answer the second part of the question, which is far more important, what keeps us from being immoral and horrible and satanic and all that if we don't believe in God? I have something in here that might...
Oh, and by the way, atheists don't believe in Satan either. Just to clarify. Oh!
I'm okay, I fixed that. Now, I apologize for playing with your feelings like that, but I needed to demonstrate something rather than just describe something. If any of you thought that I had just painfully pinched my flesh in a 3-ring binder head, you know what that feels like. And you had some sort of visceral reaction. It might have been subtle, it might have been powerful. You just demonstrated a biologically based trait in human beings and primates and many, many animals called empathy. It's built into us. And that is the primal foundation of morality. Without empathy, without the ability to accurately understand each other's emotional reaction, we would never have survived, because we didn't grow up because we were savages. We did not survive the savannas with all those predators because we were tough. We survived because we were social creatures, and we needed to be able to instantly understand accurately each other's experience, because when predators attacked, we needed to respond as a group. And from empathy has grown all of the other moral virtues: courage, the willingness to sacrifice, loyalty, honesty, all of it. It's best expressed as the golden rule, which is definitely universal. You find it in every culture. But my point is, it's built into us physiologically. Some of us have a lot of it, some of us are weak in it. A few people who have none of it are called narcissists or sociopaths. And those are devastating mental disorders. They ruin the person's life, and they ruin the lives of people around them. And so, but I wanted to make sure that you understand. When you were little, your mom and dad didn't say, now, if you ever see somebody hurt themselves, I want you to flinch and kind of go, oh, no. It was built into you. It isn't taught. It can be discouraged out of people, sadly, but it's still in there, and you can reclaim it if you've had an experience where it was reduced.
I think the second part of this question brings you back to the part of the question I was having trouble remembering before, and that is, it has to do with morality, in that, why can't atheists just believe? Why can't you just believe? There's such good things that come to you and happen, and you're filled with such goodness if you just believe, if you choose to believe. And that really is a major objection I have, because I don't think belief is a choice. I don't think you can just sit down and choose to believe something. I can tell you that Los Angeles is north of San Francisco. I can say those words, but I can't choose to believe it, no matter how much I try. I cannot force myself to actually believe it. So atheists aren't choosing to reject belief in God or a belief in the supernatural, and thereby rejecting all the moral systems that go with it. Belief is something unconscious. You don't choose. So to hold atheists accountable for their disbelief as if it's some sort of choice is really something I hope we can get past.
I noticed that I didn't answer the second half of that question. The idea that morality comes from imposition is itself a debasement of the idea of morality. Think of the legal structure around someone who has been taken hostage. If they commit a crime whilst a hostage, while under credible threat of pain or death, they are not criminally responsible for that crime. And there's a good reason for it. They are under compulsion. If your morality is imposed on you by some force of which you're required to be afraid, then you're not responsible for that goodness, no, any more than you would be for the evil you do while under such threat. It is literally a hostage situation in every legal and moral sense to say that your morality is imposed on you by external forces. It's built in innate, as Richard conclusively demonstrated just a moment ago.
I honestly don't have a lot to add because we have heard very, very good explanations for where our morality comes from. But all you have to do is, for most of us, we all have pets, right? What you simply have to do is just look at your pet when you hurt yourself and watch the terror in their eyes that you've just hurt yourself, to see the basis of empathy and morality even in creatures, in creatures that we consider to be lower than ourselves. You know, so I can tell you, you know, people consider dogs to be savage, and I trust most dogs more than I trust most people because they're predictable and they won't go out and do horrible and horrendous things just for pleasure. You know, so to think that we would be savage or immoral without a God is kind of insulting, you know. Actually, it's very insulting. Yeah. So anyway, that's all I have to add, is just look at your animals that you keep as pets, and you can see the basis of morality in even, you know, the smallest of creatures around you.
Okay, thank you. This is a question from someone in the audience that was texted to me. What do you think about near-death experiences and the amount of unexplained details associated with them?
So I've heard a lot of people bring up these arguments of near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. For instance, when somebody's near-death on the surgery table. We've done studies where people they put like playing cards in the rafters above surgeries to have, you know, people when they have out-of-body experiences. If it's true, they would, you know, go out and see what's all around them, and they would be able to see what's on this playing card, whether it was an ace of cards or whatever. And so far, nobody's ever gotten these questions right about what was above them, obviously, and you would never expect that to actually happen. So a lot of times with these out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, I think most of it is just fabricated, but there's no way to really substantiate any of the claims that are made. So You know, it's very easy to get away with that sort of thing.
Yeah, as far as the alleged details and such, all of that is after the fact. All of that is stuff claimed after the experience rather than something predicted and then confirmed. Like if someone could actually see something extrasensorily, like something hidden like that. And so it's a factor of selection bias and wishful thinking and things like that.
I don't know if I'm the only one on this stage who's actually conducted these sorts of experiments in my past, where I've had experiences with ghosts and things, but I'm also a scientist, and so I have these perceptions. Like there was if you're familiar with the pagan feast of Samhain, it's the Halloween feast is where you invite those who have died that year back to your table for one last meal. It's a very touching tradition and actually quite emotionally powerful. So, whilst still a pagan, I invited a recently deceased relative to the table and had a very, very disturbingly vivid experience of their presence there. So, I mentally asked this presence for a question to which I didn't know the answer, but they definitely would have. No answer. You can experimentally confirm that these things are illusions, no matter how powerful, no matter how emotionally comforting they are. You can prove that they're not real. And if the question had come back otherwise, would have proved that they were. And we'd be having a very different discussion had that come back that way.
Near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, so supernatural or paranormal phenomena, various kinds. Essentially, I find them unsatisfactory and untenable. Simply because I don't have any way, I'm not aware of any methodology by which I can distinguish between the misunderstood and completely understood, or as yet undiscovered natural from the so-called supernatural. So in that sense, until we know a lot more about the natural, I think it's essentially premature to ascribe anything to any kind of supernatural power or force.
I'm sure there was a time where people said, how do you explain echoes? There was a time when people said, I got visited in my dreams. I saw things in my dreams. Well, we have explanations for those things. We know what they are. And out-of-the-body experiences, at least the universal idea of heading toward a light has been largely explained through a brain that's been deprived of oxygen, dopamine being pumped into it. The experience is physiological. So why would we look for explanations elsewhere? When we find physiological evidence for all these other things, why do we assume when we don't know something that it is supernatural? That's that God of the gaps argument. If you don't have an explanation for something, fill with God, fill with the Spirit, fill with something. And as opposed to the atheist approach, which is, I don't know, working on it. We'll get it, but, it's okay to say we don't know.
Okay, I think we'll do one more question before we take a break. Sound good? And I've combined two questions, one that I've on paper and one that was texted. Okay. Do you absolutely know there is no creator, or do you just believe there is no creator? And would you be prepared to change your mind? And what would it require to change your mind and make a believer of you?
If I saw a faith healer that brought back a missing limb, I would be impressed. That never happens, ever. There are no amputees that gain limbs. That would be an ultimate test, really, but you will never see it because there's nobody doing this. I call myself an agnostic atheist, so the answer to the question is no, I don't know. I cannot know the supernatural. It's not something I can ask for. But what I experience is the natural world. That's what I experience. That's all I experience, and it's all I've ever seen. It's all the proof I've ever had. So that's why I'm an atheist. God is not in the picture for me because I have no evidence that there is any such a thing as God. And even if there was a God, to assume it's the God of a Bible there's a million possible variants. Is it multiple gods? Is God evil? From the looks of things, God's really not doing a very good job, and maybe he should be replaced with a better one or something. But no, I mean, what would it take? It would take some kind of evidence. I suppose, from a personal standpoint, people get filled with the Holy Spirit or something, and to them that's convincing. But I would even question that because I know the fallibility of my brain. I know mental illnesses occur. I had an aunt who was a paranoid schizophrenic who she burned her papers because the CIA was after them, and she was also a religious fanatic who's taped everything on television and stored those tapes in a house that was filled with garbage. So, I would even doubt my own sanity at that point. The limb, that's a setup.
It's the thing about atheists, they're a bit too generous. I'm absolutely convinced that no God exists. I'm a 7.0 on the Dawkins scale, absolutely certain. There is no space in the observed reality, observed, not just observable, for any deity yet defined. What would convince me otherwise? Any cosmological or astronomical measurement that the total energy of the universe is non-zero, that would be pretty convincing for a time, until we find the mechanism by which that was generated. Rabbits in the Precambrian would be a pretty strong argument against evolution as well as against atheism. I think that pretty much exhausts it. If it could be, if one actually appeared, I would have to doubt my own senses. It would take measurement of an extraordinary fidelity to establish the presence of such a thing, let alone its divinity. We could very well measure something that no known scientific theory accounts for. We do it all the time. That's how some discoveries are made. Nothing about one of those discoveries could be divine, by definition. They would take multiple independent anomalies of an extraordinary nature, backed by extraordinary evidence, to move me off of 7.0, even in the slightest.
To understand atheism, you first have to understand skepticism, because the root for most people's atheism is skepticism, and it's just as misunderstood a term as atheism. Skepticism is not the stubborn refusal to believe something. It's not cynicism. That's the assumption of someone else's worst possible motive or the adoption of the worst possible motive for yourself. It has nothing to do with skepticism. Skepticism is the willingness to withhold belief in a claim or proposition until acceptable evidence is presented. And when and if acceptable evidence is presented, skepticism also has to allow for the acceptance of that proposition. So it's not just, I refuse to believe no matter what you tell me. That's just as dogmatic as someone who says, I believe, no matter what you show me. And so skepticism is the root of all of that. And what is evidence? That's what we get into next. And, well, it's the things we've been talking about. It's physical things. And am I giving you enough evidence so that none of you are having any difficulty to believe that I exist. You know, there's light, solid sound. It's probably enough that you're not really having difficulty. You're not really agnostic about Richard up here. But a much bigger claim, like the claim of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, universe-creating being that embodies the entire universe and is embodied in every quark in the universe and yet is outside of the cause and effect of the laws of the universe and all that. That's a gigantic claim, and so far, zero evidence. What we get instead are arguments. But arguments are not evidence. Arguments are cheap substitutes for evidence. And no matter how many arguments you pile up on top of one another, they're not evidence. Nobody bothers coming up, spinning an argument if they've got evidence. When lawyers don't have evidence to support their side of a case, they start spinning arguments. And the evidence should be as extraordinary as the claim. So, for God to exist, you need to start with as much evidence as I'm showing you that I exist, but you need to do a lot more than that because it's not just a mortal man, it's all that I just described. Arguing for gigantic claims without any evidence is kind of like, if you're in a gunfight and you don't have any ammunition, arguing is like bang, bang, bang. You're just saying bang, bang. That's not going to do what you need it to do. It doesn't cut it with us. We need evidence. And we're not being stubborn. We're not being prideful. That's what we need. It's built into us. Some of it grew up as we became more and more skeptical. We need evidence. We can't help it. It's like we can't choose to believe because we see all of our minds, and we can't have one part of our mind fool the other part. It's all there, and you can't kid yourself into believing if you're a person who needs evidence.
I think this really is a very valid and fair question, because atheists ask the same thing of believers all the time. What evidence would it take to get you to move from your position? And I've recently come to the conclusion that I alluded to before, that for me personally, I don't think there is anything that would convince me, because I have no way of distinguishing between the natural and the supernatural in any objective, reliable way. So when I'm confronted with this, I have to admit there really isn't anything you could present to me. You might be able to do something to make me raise an eyebrow, regrowing limbs or heads, that would certainly get my attention. But I have to admit, I have no way of distinguishing natural from supernatural claims, so I have to say there isn't anything that would move me from my position at this point.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break.
For me, it would probably, sorry, I'm going to restart that. Initially, when I heard the question, my first thought is if my mother reappeared in front of me. I think that would be maybe something that would cause me to think that there was something else going on. But as I sat there and thought about it more, I realized that just like everything that's been mentioned before, like echoes and whatnot, my mother might show up right in front of me, but for me to attribute that to God would just be me taking the lazy explanation and not actually trying to figure out what happened. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was the one that said that if arguments like that cause God to be an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance, and that's just untenable. That's an untenable position. And for me, I really don't think that there's any valid evidence that could prove that, could prove the position of God. So even though I consider myself an agnostic atheist, I cannot fathom evidence that would sway me.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. You can keep the questions coming. I'm getting quite a few here. And 10 minutes? Just let us stretch our legs a bit. Okay, thank you. Okay, on to part 2. Have any of you ever made an effort to study Christian apologetics?
The question was, have any of you ever made an effort to study Christian apologetics, the basis of Christian faith? I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I think it is safe to say that every atheist that I have ever met has known Christian apologetics better than any Christian I have ever met. And that's not me trying to be divisive or say we're better than you or anything along those lines, but atheists are in minority, and we're so often confronted by Christians saying, you know, you're wrong because of this thing in the Bible. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to go out and do the research to know their argument better than they know it. So that way, anytime they try and say you're wrong because of this instance in the Bible, we can say, oh, well, in your Bible, here's this other instance that contradicts what you're saying. And to date, I don't think I've really met anybody that is an outspoken atheist that isn't true for.
Perhaps it's the luxury of living in a rather liberal area, but I've actually run into atheists who didn't have very solid refutations for nearly every theological claim. And I've actually met some that didn't really hadn't really seriously considered a lot of the arguments against the basic atheist proposition that there is no observable God. And that is an aberration for a reason. It's a luxury, certainly, but it is aberrant because pretty much every school child will encounter some claim that borders on or is overtly religious. From a formative one in my own past was this idea that if you took a picture of another camera at the same time as that one was taking a picture of the first camera, that is photograph a camera while it's taking a picture, the two cameras would explode. Very easily disproven claim, but surprisingly difficult when you're 7. So I've wrestled with that for quite a long time. So I thought, well, what would make it explode? Is it some emissive thing? One camera emits some beam of energy toward another, and if it hits the emitter of the other camera, they explode. Well, cameras receive light, they don't emit anything. The whole point is that they don't emit anything. That's why they're black on the inside. It keeps the reflection down. So it can't be that, and just work through each argument, think, well, maybe it has to be extremely precisely timed, maybe they can sense it, but you can time things very, very precisely now, thanks to general and special relativity. So that's not it either, and eventually worked it to the point where that's conclusively disproven in my mind, but I still get a little bit nervous. Pointing the camera and pulling the trigger while someone else is doing the same. That's the closest thing I have to a religious upbringing, actually.
When I was a kid, my grandfather convinced me that put salt on a bird's tail, you could catch it. It doesn't take very long before you realize your grandfather's not telling you the truth. And it's like when you have that kind of absurdity, when you're a kid it makes sense for a little bit, and you try it, and you think, you can't do that, and you're right, you can't do that. And for me, as far as studying religion, the thing that convinces me more and more and more that I'm right is reading the Bible. The more I read it, the more I'm convinced that it's poppycock to me. I've read Genesis a number of times. It's my favorite book. It's fascinating, and nothing in it makes any sense at all. It's some crazy stuff in there, a dome over the earth with water behind it, and all of this stuff that I know is completely fabricated. It's not true at all. And And then when you start studying more of other cultures and you see their input in this, you see that this Noah story is plagiarized, it's not original. You know, it becomes, the whole thing becomes almost laughable. And so, yeah, I guess to answer the question, yeah, I think all atheists really do give an opportunity or try to do this. There was a time when I was a believer and I wanted miracles to happen. I wanted it so badly, but it didn't. Because, you know, the only conclusion I can draw is because it doesn't exist. You know, any more than salt on a bird's tail.
You already know my opinion about arguments, and that's what apologists do. They make their living spinning very complicated arguments for the existence of God. But there are no apologists for the sun. And now, have I read every word of every famous apologist? No. But I've read quite a bit, and I've listened to their arguments for many years, and I haven't actually heard a new one in quite a while. I've heard a lot of variations on the same 12 or 13 of them over and over again. But there's no apologists for the sun. That's because we don't need to spin complicated arguments for the existence of the sun. All you have to do is go outside and you will be bombarded with evidence at the speed of light. And it's not just evidence that it exists, but it's detailed information about its innermost workings that we can actually end up reproducing on the earth. It's information. It's an intimate look at the sun. Now the sun is huge. It's 100 times the diameter of the earth, and you could get 1 million inside if it was a hollow ball. And so it's enormous. But as stars go, it's average in every way. It's ordinary, it's nondescript, it's just a common star, lost in 100 billion or 200 billion stars in our galaxy, which is lost in an observable universe of billions of galaxies. So it's really a small, insignificant little thing compared to the whole universe. And for something such a speck as the sun, we have an enormous amount of evidence. But for something claimed even bigger than the universe, the God, all you have are arguments. And that's a cheap substitute for evidence. Have I listened to their evidence? Yes, I listened carefully. I haven't found one that isn't full of fallacies.
Okay, thank you. What is the best thing about being an atheist, and what is the worst thing? I know you've touched on what is the worst thing. What is the best thing about being an atheist?
Well, it's easy. I met my wife at a Freethinkers meetup. That was the best thing.
Okay, another real answer.
I also find that one of the best things for me of being an atheist too is that the people that I'm around, the new friends that I've made, they're loyal. They're good people and they're loyal, and we have a good time and we enjoy each other's company. And they're all really smart too, and I like that. I like to hear that. You know, I like to listen to them. It's something that I'm inspired by some, and I'm stimulated by others, and those are the good parts about being an atheist. And the bad side of being an atheist, I don't see a downside.
I do. And it's this, it's that, well, it relates to the best thing, which I guess I'll briefly say, is the best thing is being able to live without illusion. It's the ability to, say, grieve and know what you're actually grieving, or love and know what you're actually loving, know the process behind it, the incredible intricacy of the mind involved. It's It's that kind of clarity of vision, clarity of sensation, that I think is the best thing about, as it happens, accidentally being an atheist. And the worst thing is that I have to watch people that don't have it. And worse than that, won't have it. Who can't tolerate that kind of clarity. Who have reached a ripe, grand old age and still don't know how to grieve for a lost loved one. That is painful in a very visceral way. So I think that's probably the worst thing about being an atheist, is having to watch those that aren't.
For me, the best thing about being an atheist is the fact that I don't have to hide anything anymore, and I don't have to feel guilty for being my natural self, just who I am, who I was born to be. But the worst part is something that I was reminded of recently, is dealing with the loss of loved ones, like Jay was mentioning. In that religion gives you a nice comforting feeling that this pain that you feel is only temporary, and once you die you get to be reunited. But the hard thing, and I'm sure that this is probably one of the reasons why our position isn't more widely held, is that when you're an atheist you don't have that comfort. You no longer get to sit there and think, I get to see this person later. And I just recently saw a friend Halloween night who I will now never see again. And I had no idea that that was going to happen, but it is a heartbreaking moment. And to think that, you know, this person died so tragically and so suddenly without me being able to experience his company anymore is just horrible. And I'm sure that if I was capable of having religious belief, that would be the one thing that might draw me towards that position.
The three best things are sleeping in on Sunday, keeping 10% of my gross income, although I actually found out I actually donate to various charities more than 10% of my income, so I need to be careful. But, and always having an increase in my sensation of awe and wonder. Because if I were religious, I would be satisfied with simplistic answers. God did it. Or, you don't have to worry about that, you'll find out later when you're dead. And, but some people think that science and being scientific, you lose the ability to have awe and wonder. That emotion, that delightful sensation of awe and wonder requires belief in the supernatural. No, it doesn't. No matter how many questions we answer, we will always have awe and wonder, because awe and wonder and beauty isn't intrinsic in the things we're learning about. It's built into us. It's part of being human, is to have awe and wonder. And so when I get an explanation that makes sense scientifically about something that was sort of mystically explained before, it's more fascinating. It's more amazing. It increases it. So I keep getting to have an enriched sensation of wonder in the universe. The worst thing about it is, well, my bio mentioned a column I wrote, an advice column for atheists having trouble with their loved ones, their friends or relatives, because they're atheists. And some of these letters that I've gotten are heartbreaking. They're awful. And I sit there after reading them and I go, what am I going to do for this person? Because, you know, I'm tempted to just say, pack and run for the bus. But I got to do something better than that. So I brood over them for days and days and days, trying to come up with something to try to turn it into the possibility of positivism. But because I'm on the outside of religion, I see the injustice and the outrageousness ignorance of the abuse that is done to usually young people, because they're the most vulnerable, who just can't fit in with the belief system of their families or their friends. And it is nasty, nasty stuff. I don't want to get into how bad it can get, but it can just be appalling. And so that constantly hurts my feelings, because I have real strong empathy, and it's awful to feel so helpless when I know this is going to go on and on, less and less perhaps over the next several generations, but it's still going to go on and on.
The best thing for me, to paraphrase a young Hirsi Ali, is that atheism is the only conclusion that doesn't leave me with any cognitive dissonance. So when I was a believer, I would look at the world and the universe, and I would see bad things happening to good people, bad things happening to bad people, good things happening to bad people, and good things happening to good people. I'd see innocent babies dying of brain cancer, and selfish bastards living until their 90s in luxury and everything they wanted. So once I was able to get away from that, I was much more able to enjoy my experience in life. I no longer had to worry about if God was good and allowed some evil, or was evil and allowed some good, or any multiple combination of gods, a God that's both good and evil. I didn't have to bother with that sort of thing anymore. It's a very streamlined point of view. You can just focus on the natural, things you can see and feel and touch, and it can be very fulfilling that way. The worst thing is other people's reaction to atheism. We promoted this event in various venues, including Facebook, and one of the responses by a friend of a friend on Facebook was, in the invitation to this event, was, "Why bother? They're already going to hell." And the reaction I get when we, Antelope Valley Freethinkers, offered a scholarship to the high school district, to students who are graduating, moving on to higher education. The Antelope Valley High School District refused to promote it. They will promote religious scholarships, but not ours. So it's things like that that really make it difficult. It's other people's reactions. For me, it's very fulfilling because it is the only conclusion the best conclusion I've come to at this point for reality.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've merged two questions again. You are all white-collar types. Are atheists all super achievers? And if so, why do you think that is? And are there any dumb atheists? I'm just reading them as a gift. Okay, you are all white-collar types. Are atheists all super achievers? If so, why do you think that is? And are there any dumb atheists?
The answer to the second part of the question is yes. Atheism is just a position on theism. It says nothing about your intelligence, your education, how you arrived at that conclusion. I'd like to think that the atheists I know, including those on this panel, have made an informed decision about their atheism. It wasn't just a spin of the wheel, a random decision. It was something that was hard thought, something that was thought through carefully. The unexamined life is not worth living. And I think a lot of us try to live that examined life. Does that mean every atheist does? No, just like every theist isn't. intelligent, or an achiever, or caring, or moral. There's really no relation from one to the other.
I know a number of atheists who are not the brightest crayon in the box. And that's okay, I think. I mean, as Dave pointed out, it's just a position on whether or not there is evidence to support a belief in a God. The first part of the question was, the white-collar types. You do find statistically that atheists tend to be better educated. It's not everyone, but statistically they tend to be. You would find a lot of Jews, often better educated and often atheists, including good chunks of my family. And it's because they've gone to university, because they've been exposed to different ideas, because they were challenged to think these things through, that they arrived at a logical conclusion. So it really had nothing to do so much, I don't think, with how intelligent they were, but the circumstances they found themselves in led to a particular conclusion.
I just want to say about the overachiever part. Well, I must be an extreme underachiever because compared to my brilliance and amazing potential that I never live up to, yeah, I'm not living up to that at all. So, no, I'm not an overachiever. Do I know any dumb atheists? Yeah, I know a couple of dumb atheists, and that's not what makes me like them. What makes me like them is the way they treat other people. They treat those people with respect and compassion, and that doesn't really take much intelligence to do that. That's what makes me like or dislike anyone. It's not how smart they are, it's how kind they are and thoughtful.
Atheism can be linked to a number of different factors. If you look around the world, you'll notice that the more free a society is, the higher the levels of atheism. The more well-off, the more money a certain society has, the higher level of atheism there is. Now, the other thing that also correlates with that is in both of those situations, the better off a society is, the more educated the population is going to be as well. So it follows naturally that the position of outspoken atheists would usually be that of people that are highly educated. It usually just goes hand in hand. But even amongst the Antelope Valley Freethinkers, there are people that have lived blue-collar lives, had careers, that are considered blue-collar, that are also some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people that would be considered dumb. I would maybe say ignorant would be a better word for that, but just keep in mind that atheism is the default position you're born with. So if you aren't indoctrinated with any religion, then you just stay atheist your entire life. It's not something that's, that you have to be indoctrinated into, so it's natural to think that there would be ignorant people amongst atheists.
I can say with confidence that there are dumb atheists about, there are blue-collar atheists about, there are psychotic atheists about. It turns out, on examination of the prison system, that there aren't a whole lot of them. Atheists are statistically underrepresented in American prisons, which is something of which to be proud, even if you're only accidentally an atheist. Something like 0.7 or 0.07% of the prison population is atheistic, compared with about 10 to 15% of the general population. It's a massive statistical disparity. And it's worth noting also that in the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, they're having to close prisons because there aren't enough criminals anymore now that their societies are verging on 90+% atheist. It's a fantastic achievement of those societies that they're having so little problem with crime as a result of people being so caring by default. The default position, it turns out, is the most empathic. Now, regarding education level, it takes, as Gabe was alluding to, a certain amount of education to become a theist. You have to learn that somewhere. Even if it's on the schoolyard, you've learned something to make you believe that there's something out there. It turns out there are substantial barriers to entry to the next position, which is, I guess you can call it informed atheism, where you're not just taking the default position and going with it because it is that easy. You're taking the education of the theists around you and comparing them to each other, figuring out that there's no possible way for all of them to be true, and I think it was Bertrand Russell observed, every believer should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability, given the number of gods on offer. But there have been serious barriers raised to getting to that next level. The first being the absence of the printing press for so many millennia, inexplicably. And access to information, I think more than prosperity, correlates to the rate of atheism in a society. You look at Southeast Asian countries have greater internet penetration than even the US does, and the European countries that have the same thing. They're becoming atheistic even faster than we are. And it works everywhere, as many important historians have said. So the access to information is getting easier and easier. You can now, with a device from any of your local fine emporiums, get more information than was available to the greatest scholars of the 13th century, in less time than it takes to make a sandwich. It's phenomenal, the amount of information we have, and given that environment, you're going to see those barriers to entry continue to drop. And the informed atheism, of which you have some reasonably good examples in front of you, is going to become more common, just as a matter of the democratization of information.
Thank you. I think we've probably only got enough time for maybe 2 more questions. So I've chosen the 2 that I think are most interesting. And I apologize if I didn't get to all your questions. So this will be the second to last question. You are all male and seemingly intelligent. Men and women are often very different in the way they perceive things and react, especially emotionally. Do you think that atheists are equally male and female?
I'm reasonably confident that all male atheists are equally male and all female atheists are equally female.
I think they mean the...
Population-wide, I don't have the statistics available to me. I'm sure it could be found by a Pew Research or whoever conducts the survey. But I suspect the difference, if there is one, will also continue to decrease over time as the atheist community, such as it is, starts building out a more accessible system of ideologies, of comforts, there's a community online for grieving atheists, or grief beyond belief, and things like this that are becoming real things that are out there for anyone to access as easily as they could through a church. It's been said of the New Life Church in Colorado Springs that it's a total solution. You have Christian groups for everything from science to dog walking. It's an amazing variety of things, and as the atheist community in the US and abroad grows, it'll have more of that diversity, more of that richness, and more of that build-out as a social system that allows it to negate any emotional advantage that religion might have had.
You know, it occurred to me, we're in an information age, and I don't think it'll take my friend long to find an answer to your question. And I think that's a lot of how atheists work, is if we have a question, we can say, I don't know, but I can try to find out. And I don't have to guess or make something up, or I don't have to, I can, create some postulate, try to, come up with some intellectual idea, well, women are more social, so they're more likely to be in church than men are to say, but I don't know. And so with any luck, Gabe's going to find out here in a second. All right.
Here we go. So, gender distribution of religious groups, the unaffiliated, you have 64% male, 36% female, and for nothing in particular, so atheist light, I guess, 53% male and 47% female.
Close. Pretty close. Close. It's a large minority. Yeah. That question had this sort of presumption that said that women think and feel differently emotionally?
They're different in the way that they perceive things and react, especially emotionally.
Perhaps. I've gotten to know hundreds of thousands of people real closely, and as a counselor, and so I know how they react, and I think it's a mistake to simply stereotype males and females and how they react. Like the stereotype about females are more emotional and males are more rational. The emotional ones are emotional, the rational ones are rational, whether they are male or female. And I've known every combination. My home group, my atheist meetup group, I think it's actually the people who regularly come, it's about one more than half are female. And some are wonderfully emotional and some are wonderfully rational, and almost all of them are mixed. And so I wish we had one here. Here we are, we're all white, and we have people of color are atheists. They're a minority to begin with, but then they're a minority of a minority in atheism, and so I'd like to see that more represented, and eventually I hope it will be. But I wish we had some non-white people up here, and I wish we had some females up here, but they do exist.
I think it is a fair question, given the composition of the panel, as Richard was alluding to. The question has come up a lot in different atheist situations and forums and groups. This question of diversity. Is it all middle-aged white males? And that's really what the public sees most of the time. Public atheists like Dawkins and Harris and the late Christopher Hitchens, things like that. They are definitely out there. It's just the face of atheism and free thought is largely white and largely male. So the community is hopefully starting to address this, and hopefully we'll see an improvement in that diversity.
Those are the penultimate questions.
Okay, it's really hard to choose the final question. Because there's so many great questions here that I'd still like to ask.
Let me make a quick suggestion.
Of course.
We have some guests here who are believers that may have.
We have some guests that are believers that may have a question, and I think we're up here for you. Otherwise, we're preaching to the choir. So, is there anybody here who had a question in particular that was just gnawing away at them? If not, we're going to just make one up.
It's probably one
Do you think the world would be a better place if all religion did not exist at all?
His question is does the panel feel that the world would be better off without religion?
I say yes.
My answer is yes, and unequivocally, it's yes.
So I think your question is a little bit dependent on the time period that you look at in human history, because religion definitely played a very important role in uniting humans together, bringing together groups and making us understand how to live in large groups together. Though in today's modern society, we understand that quite thoroughly, and I think that given what we know about the world and what science has given us in terms of the power to explain the unknown, I think that the only role that religion really has to play anymore is to basically cause good people to do bad things. Generally speaking, now that's a generalization. There are plenty of believing people that do amazing things, but I think they would be doing those things without the religion anyway.
Generally, I think the world will be better off when religion is finally so reduced and it's just steadily dropping. Because I think it does more harm than good, especially that in enabling people to continue to make assumptions based on nothing but somebody else's assertion. And anybody can talk anybody into doing anything if that kind of thinking process is acceptable. And people are raised from small children to think that that's an acceptable way of thinking. But it's important to also add that I don't want to see religion forced out of society. I want to see it disappear through attrition. I want to see what I'm seeing is just younger and younger groups of people are just losing interest in it because it does not answer their questions and they are not satisfied with the simplistic answers to their questions anymore. So I don't want it abolished. To abolish it would be a tyranny just as bad as the ones that we escaped in Europe 200 years ago. We need to simply encourage rational thinking and let it disappear naturally.
I actually don't want to see religion disappear for this reason. The experience of it, or the knowledge of its thought systems, inoculates people against its more virulent strains when approached historically. If we didn't have the example of the cargo cults of the Southern Pacific, or of the Inquisition, or the more recent experiences of the Middle East, so saliently burned into our collective minds, we would be just as up for grabs for the next, I think Sagan said it best, the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. You see this in North Korea. We saw it under the gulags of the Soviet Union. It's the religious thought pattern of which children must be taught and must be inoculated against on a continuing basis. Otherwise, we slide back into it. It's rooted so deep in our neurophysiology that you can do this with pigeons, where you can reliably make a pigeon superstitious just by blinking a light at it randomly and feeding it randomly. It'll do whatever it did before the food came in response to the light, or not, depending on what it thinks might be the correlation that made it cause the food to appear. You can do this with almost any animal, and you can definitely do it with people. As long as we remain human, it will be essential to inoculate ourselves continually Just like we vaccinate every newborn against a host of diseases we know are easily prevented by them, we need to inoculate people against religion. So we need, in essence, a education, but more than that, a vaccine or a deactivated version of religion. The historical version. Yeah, mythology might be the most appropriate term for it. A dead virus with which to inoculate the mind against the live strains that very much will tear society apart.
Well, unlike Richard, I am not overly optimistic that we're going to see an end to religion anytime soon. I think there's been certainly some degradation and some inroads against it, but at this point I'm not overly confident that we're going to see any significant reduction in religion anytime soon. As a free thinker, I believe that freedom of inquiry and the freedom to your own thoughts is essential to human well-being and a healthy society. And outlawing or forbidding any kind of thinking or expression of that thinking, I think, is a mistake. But any ideology that promotes authoritarianism, dogmatism, believing without seeing, which would include a lot of versions of religion, I think we would be better off without. I think we could do well without a lot of those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you. Just in an effort to end off the evening on a more light-hearted vein, I'm going to ask one last question, and you don't all have to answer it. But I thought it was a pretty cool answer. Question. Okay, pretend you're no longer an atheist. If you were to pick a religion that you'd be willing to associate yourself with, what would it be and why?
It would be Christianity, because I could make a buttload of money. I need a jet airplane.
I think I would probably follow ancient Norse mythology if I were believing that, just because they had very interesting characters. They're very, very lively, and on top of that, when you look around, Thor said he'd get rid of the ice giants. And I don't see any ice giants around. There's some evidence there.
I can't imagine myself doing it. I'd have to really think about that. Even returning to Zen Buddhism, which is really a non-theistic religion, it gave me some ideas that still work for me, like whatever I'm attached to, that's going to cause me suffering sooner or later, and so I need to be selective about what I'm attached to. But that's more of a philosophical thing, but I really can't see embracing supernaturalism. It just, I can't.
I'd have to go with the pagans. As Eddie Izzard put it, paganisms were into sex, death, and religion in an interesting nighttime telly kind of way. And that's kind of my sort of people. The dance around in the forest, I could get with that. It'd be a great way to pass the time.
Gabe wants to change his answer.
I don't want to change my answer, I just want to admit to you I was wrong. It was actually Odin that said that, not Thor.
You're wrong about that too, because Odin wasn't real either.
So that's the end of our evening. Thank you for the great questions. We're the Antelope Valley Freethinkers. You can find us on Facebook and on the meetup site. We have some pamphlets and business cards outside on the table. I'm always happy to have you join us. And thank you to our panelists for answering all the questions.
I just want to make sure we thank our hosts for the courage it takes to have 5 atheists come up and sit on their dais up here, and that's no small thing. I've done this at now 6 churches, and it's extraordinary because it's very unusual to be able and willing to have us up here. And so I thank you deeply to all the people who were part of saying yes to this idea.